Star Wars, Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones. Probably one of the most identifiable parts of these film series are their iconic themes, which were all written by the genius composer John Williams. Now, you might not think of this often, but studios actually hire composers to write these wonderful pieces of music in a terribly short amount of time. So first and foremost, I identify as a musician, but more importantly, a composer just like John Williams. Well, not quite. Now, I'm not as nearly as advanced as he is, but I understand the long process that composers take to come up with a good idea. And it can take months, years, and even decades before coming up with something even comparable to one of Williams' works. But the thing is, have you ever thought of what movies would sound like without their audio tracks? I mean, without composers, there would be no music in films for us to feel the mood of a certain scene, and no music to help us enjoy whatever we're doing. So today, what we're going to discuss is we're going to talk about, number one, how the composer's music contributes to the emotional weight of a scene, and number two, how our lives would be affected if music never existed. So let's take a look at how music can change a film. If I can get a show of hands, how many of you have ever cried during a movie? It's okay, I have two. And for those of you who have, some of the emotions were triggered by the sound of the music. Composers who write for TV shows and movies, they try to focus on what they think the music should sound like in order to get the audience to feel a certain emotion. Take Pirates of the Caribbean, for example, and think of any piece you can think of or recognize from the movie. You've probably thought of Pirate's Life for Me or He's a Pirate. And without the brilliant mind of Hans Zimmer, you wouldn't be able to feel those adventurous feelings and all those other different types of emotions that you get from that scene. And the scene of He's a Pirate would just feature Captain Jack Sparrow jumping, flying, sailing, and arriving at port, which doesn't sound very exciting. Now, with composers who write music recreationally, kind of like how I do, it's a little bit different. Instead of needing to write a piece to help enhance the emotions that you get from a scene, our compositions need to tell a story. Composers today write in many types of styles, but what they all have in common is that they try to get their message across to the audience. It's very similar to movie compositions, since they both try to make sure that the audience gains something from their wonderful music. Moving on, let's talk about what would happen if music never existed in our lives. I know music is a big part of many of our lives, and there are athletes in here that maybe listen to music before they go do whatever it is they're doing, and there are also other musicians in here too. Now, the thing is, if music and composition never existed, I would literally have nothing to do in my spare time, and I mean nothing. Because without music, number one, I wouldn't be able to be a musician. Number two, I wouldn't be able to be a pianist. Number three, I wouldn't be able to be a composer and share the joy of music with everyone else. Being a figure skater, our programmed music relied heavily on the compositions of many different composers in order to create the right soundtrack to fit the time limit and to fit the skater. Without composition, I would have missed out on so many great opportunities, and I wouldn't have been able to perform locally and throughout the world, missing on some of the best memories of my life. I also know many of you listen to music while doing homework. Even though it might not be movie soundtracks, you guys may listen to genres such as jazz, R&B, pop, classical, and much more. There's so much music that goes on in our lives every day, and I think that without the composers of these pieces of music, how would you be able to focus on what you're doing, study hard, concentrate, and more importantly, mentally prepare yourself and calm down before a big test? It'll be a lot harder to do. So, to wrap this all up, music is without a doubt very influential in our lives and affects us both physically and psychologically. Just remember to think about what movies would be like without audio tracks. Without composers, you wouldn't be able to feel a certain emotion during a scene, and you wouldn't be able to enjoy what you're doing without music. And a composer's composition contributes to the emotional weight of a scene, and our lives would be greatly affected if music never existed. And in conclusion, for composers, everything about music is important. There's so much music we hear on radios, TV, movies, and sporting events, and there's so much more that I can go into. Without music, our life would be flat. And I just want to tell you that if any of you ever have a creative idea, just go for it, just do it, and just write it down. Maybe you'll become the next famous Hollywood composer, the next John Williams.